everybody, welcome to REVAMP, Revelations of an Autism Mom Professional. I'm Tabitha, your 24-hour online personal parent support professional, and I'm here for you. Now today I want to share with you how I was able to get my nonverbal autistic son to talk. We're talking real words here that led to conversation. Now if you want to hear more about my experience, follow me. Ready? Let's go! Welcome to REVAMP, Revelations of an Autism Mom Professional, where I'm taking a fresh new look at autism. Now, I remember when I was a little girl, I used to love playing with my dolls. I would wake up early in the morning on a Saturday, pull out all 20 plus dolls and my stuffed animals, line them all up, and pretend that I was a teacher and they were all my students. Then, at the end of my play day, I would pretend that I would convert from teacher to mom. And all my 20 plus dolls and all my stuffed animals were my children. And I would love them and hug them and play with them and dress them and feed them and do all the things that a mom would do for their children. So at the end of their night, I would take these large bath towels, roll them up like a tube, and use it as a pillow. So I would take 2 of them and strategically place it to the length of my bed. And before I put each of my dolls' head down on their pillow, I would put them up to my face and pretend they were giving me a kiss. And then I would lay them down, each of them, and get these little teeny colored washcloths and cover each of them up with the washcloth. And that was their blanket to keep them nice and warm. And I just loved being their mom. And before they all went to sleep, they would all say to me these 4 magic words. Mommy, I love you. Oh, I was so touched. And I mean, it just really touched me. So even though that was really all in my mind, the bottom line is, at that point in my life, I knew one day I wanted to be a mom. And I could not wait to finally have my own baby. So later in life, fast forwarding about 30 years, in January 2002, I found out that I was expecting my first little one. And I was so excited. Oh my God. Because that's what I always wanted to be more than anything, a mom. And I couldn't wait for my child to give me a kiss and to tell me, Mommy, I love you. So October 2002 rolled around and my son was born. And I was so excited. And I couldn't wait for him to talk to me. But he was a newborn and he couldn't say anything. So I guess I had to give him some time. But okay, so I was patient. So I waited. But during the first 3 months of motherhood, it was a little different from what I expected because he didn't really smile very much and he didn't really show too much emotion. And even when he cried sometimes, he didn't really shed any tears. I mean, sometimes he did, but sometimes he just didn't. But he was making all this noise like he was crying. And the way he would just stare at me, it was like he would look at me like, who are you? And I'm like thinking, he doesn't like me. So I was a little offended by the way he looked at me sometimes because I really thought he didn't like me. So I talked to my mom about it, of course, and she comforted me and said, oh, he loves you. He's just a baby. He doesn't know any better. So I gave him the benefit of the doubt. So when he was 3 months old, he still wasn't really showing a lot of emotion, but he did once in a blue moon. He did kind of laugh. But during that time period, he cried a lot. I mean, just cried endlessly. And I remember his dad and I took him to the emergency room. And when we went to the emergency room one night, we were waiting for like 10 hours. And he cried the whole 10 hours. Basically nonstop. I mean, maybe there were like 2 or 3 times that he kind of dropped off to sleep, but he did not stay asleep for more than like 2 minutes. And he was back up and yelling and screaming, and I just couldn't figure it out. What was he crying about? I mean, I just couldn't figure it out. So my son was formula fed, mainly because when I tried to breastfeed when he was born, he wouldn't latch on. So I noticed when he was about 3 months old, he started spitting up a lot. So he would just spit up, spit up, spit up. Everywhere we go, he would just spit up. I couldn't go in the store for at least 5 minutes without him spitting up at least 20 times. So he was spitting up so much, I took him to the doctor, who referred us to a gastroenterologist. And the gastroenterologist, they referred us for a barium study. So the barium study is a study where they give the baby a drink, special drink, in their bottle, and it highlights their whole GI system. So they take these pictures randomly to monitor the drink going through the system to see if there's any abnormalities, any obstruction. So there was no abnormality. So the end result was they diagnosed him with reflux, which is pretty much like a bad case of indigestion almost, and maybe from some weakened muscles in the esophagus or the stomach or whatever. And pretty much he would still spit up a lot. So they gave us some medicine called Reglan, and we took the medicine. He took the medicine, and it didn't help. So then the pediatrician said to put some rice cereal in his formula so that it would kind of hold it down. It makes it a little bit heavier so it would stay down. But he would just spit up still. It was just thicker spit up. And this went on until he was about 11 months old. So when he was 11 months old, this is when it actually stopped. But during that time, when he was about 9 months, I noticed when I was talking to him, he was like looking at my lips. I mean, he was always staring at my lips. Anytime I was talking, it was like almost like he was confused or something. I couldn't figure it out. So I was wondering, well, is he deaf? Does he not hear me? So I took him for audiology testing, and all the audiology hearing tests came back totally normal. And he was still staring at my lips every time I would say something. He wasn't looking in my eyes, but he never had a problem, it seemed like, looking in my eyes when he did. But when I was talking, he would only zone in on my lips. So I was confused. I mean, this kid just totally confused the heck out of me. I couldn't figure it out. So I was waiting until he was 1 year old. I was so excited. Couldn't wait till he was 1. So he was on track with all his milestones up until the age of 1. He was walking at age 1, everything. So the only thing he wasn't doing was talking. And I'm like, okay, well, when he's 1 year old, we're going to talk and we can laugh and all this other stuff together. And this was the moment I was looking for. So 1 year old birthday came and it left. And he didn't say anything. I mean, he cried during his birthday party. He was irritable the whole time. And I mean, for the first year of life, he was just a miserable, irritable kid. But he was happy sometimes. But that first 6 months, I really didn't see a lot of emotion. And after that, I started to see a little bit more emotion. I mean, he would, be more playful and whatnot. But I never heard him say any words. As a matter of fact, he wasn't even really babbling too much or cooing or any of that. So it was just crying all the time, just cry, 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 cry. So when he was 1 year old, I took him back to the pediatrician because, he wasn't talking. And she says, oh, he's a boy, boys delayed. Boys are delayed. They are slower. Girls advance more faster. So just give him some more time. Okay, so I was giving him some more time. And during the process, I'm working so hard, time is just getting away. And, my son is still not talking. So I took him back to the pediatrician when he was about 18 months. And he still wasn't talking. And she was like, oh, give him some more time. So by that time, I'm like, no, there's something else going on. So I kind of had a high index of suspicion that it was autism, but I kind of didn't want to believe it was autism. So I knew that he had to get further testing done and all this other good stuff. So she had given us a referral to ECI, which is Early Childhood Intervention, and also gave us a referral to a neurodevelopmental pediatrician so he could have testing done. So we went to the neurodevelopmental pediatrician, and they did all this testing, and it was like right after Thanksgiving, and all the results came back just before Christmas. So, Merry Christmas, your son has autism. I was in denial because I'm like, this cannot be. Now, I knew that there was something wrong, and I had a high index of suspicion that it was autism, but I was like in denial. I just did not want to accept that diagnosis. So when the doctor gave us the diagnosis, she even just made it even worse. She just poured salt right into the wound. And she says, well, you know, he'll never talk. He's going to be more on the level of mental retardation. And I'm like, the devil is a liar. I don't think so. So that really kind of spoiled my vibe because, you know, I'm like, okay, it's right before Christmas and you're going to say this to me? It was just like so unbelievable. I could not believe that she was telling me that my son was going to be mentally retarded right before Christmas. Like, Merry Christmas. So this is a prime example of what I said in my very first video. You know your child better than anyone, just like I know my child better than anyone. So for this woman to come in on a day just before the holidays to tell me some crazy stuff like that, trying to mess up my vibe and say, oh, your child will never be functional. I mean, she's just absolutely doing the most because I know my child. And even though he wasn't talking, I knew he had potential. It was just a matter of figuring it all out. Now, she had no right to do that. And don't ever let anyone, no one, I don't care if they're a doctor or whatever the heck their title is, your mom and you know best, or dad and you know best. The thing is, no one has the right to tell you that your child has no potential and to make a long-term diagnosis when they don't even know the child's actual true ability. Now, when my son was being tested, a lot of the things that they were asking him to do, I knew he knew how to do them, but he didn't do it because maybe either he didn't want to or because it was a mood thing, you know? And the thing about it is, it's a test. A test only lasts for a certain length of time, and it's a test. It's not reality. It's testing that child in the moment. And at that very moment, maybe he just didn't want to do what she was asking. So to make a long-term life decision about his outcome, his prognosis, and not really know if this was just a bad day for him, come on now, seriously, that's just wrong. So don't ever let anybody tell you that your child has no potential, especially when you have that motherly or fatherly instinct in you and you feel like they do have hope. Go with your gut. You can't go wrong. Okay, I'm getting a little upset here. I need to take a break. So I contacted ECI, and ECI came out and they did an evaluation of his speech. They did his occupational therapy, looking at fine motor, gross motor skills. He had educational kind of like assessment, a lot of different things they did, social skills, behavioral, and they were looking at a lot of different things. So once they completed their assessment, they found that he was eligible for early childhood intervention services. So someone came out to the home like twice a week for speech therapy. Then we had someone for occupational therapy, and we had all kinds of people coming in helping him, which was great because this was the time when he was really going to learn the most amount of information and retain it. Just before he was 3 years old, they did another assessment. And when they did the second assessment, they found that he was still deficient in multiple areas. Social skills, he wasn't giving any eye contact. He was not, he wasn't talking still. And he was having some behavioral challenges. And he was eating okay, though. And he was actually sleeping pretty decent. But he still wasn't progressing off of stage 2 baby food. And that was a challenge. I mean, it didn't seem like it was a texture thing. I mean, I'm just not sure why he wouldn't progress off, but he didn't seem like he was progressing off of stage 2 baby food. And he was like almost 3 years old. So as time went by, I had another child and my daughter came along. And as she got a little bit older, she was the one who actually got him to eat solid food. I mean, she would have a piece of broccoli in her hand and she was like, here, eat this. And he would eat it, and she's like, good job, high five, you know? And that was like a real crazy motivator because he actually listened to her. So she was like a blessing that came in disguise who actually helped him to get through this whole eating challenge. But the bottom line is, when he was 3 years old, he was eligible to start regular public school because he met the criteria through early childhood intervention. So he started preschool, and he got rigorous speech. I mean, I took him to outside speech along with the early childhood intervention at one point, and he was getting speech therapy in school. I put him in preschool so that he could be around other kids, so that he could hopefully catch on to talking and being interactive. I mean, I did all of this stuff. He had occupational therapy appointments, all of that. I mean, all of the things that those kids with autism need. So I took him for all these appointments, and still he wasn't really talking. And I noticed that he seemed to have like this glazed look in his eyes most of the time. It's like he was almost foggy-brained or clouded or something. So I could not figure out what was going on with him. He was eating fine, and there was nothing I could think of that would cause his speech delay. So he was having a lot of behavior, and he's always had behavior that was kind of like off the chart, but the behavior seemed to get worse and worse and worse. And I thought that maybe the behavior was more because he was not able to express himself. So when he was in preschool, he would come home every day so thirsty. I mean, he would drink. And it's like he would drink a river. I could give him 20 ounces of whatever was in his cup, and he would just drink the whole thing without breathing. And I was concerned about juvenile diabetes, because with juvenile diabetes, you can have increased thirst and increased hunger and, urinating a lot. And I couldn't vouch for how much he was urinating, but he was drinking so much. And his eating habits hadn't changed too much, but the drinking was just crazy. So I also noticed before the age of 3 that he was affectionate. I mean, he would hug me, but when he tried to give me a kiss, he really couldn't. So like, this is my face and this is his mouth. And he's like that. So he would plaster his open, wet mouth and tongue, boom, right on my face. Like, ugh. But I would take what I could get because I knew what he was trying to do. But I'm like, he can't kiss me. That was what I was looking for. And he couldn't say, "Mommy, I love you," because he couldn't talk. So I was a little down about that because I was never, anticipating any of this. And I was thinking, well, maybe he'll never say it, So I just have to get used to that. Maybe my next child will be able to. And I didn't give up on him, but I got into that little mode that, I talked about in my last video, where you get into this mode, you kind of sink in, and, you get a little down about autism itself. And it made me a little depressed because I always was anticipating the moment when I would get a kiss and a hug and get the words, "I love you." I got the hug, but I never got the other two things at that time. So I went to the school and talked to his teacher about why he was drinking so much. And she said that he wasn't drinking his juice. She said they would give the kids juice boxes, like, 3 times, sometimes 4 times a day. And I never gave him straight juice anyway. But, I was like, maybe he didn't drink it because it's too sweet. Maybe that's just like, he didn't really like it. Because he was only used to like 5% water, 5% juice and 95% water. So I was like, well, maybe it's the taste. So she said, well, he doesn't try to drink it. He just kind of plays with it or whatever. So I decided to do this experiment, and I went out and got a juice box. So I gave him the juice box at dinner time, and he did the same thing. He was just like, playing around with it with his mouth. And then all of a sudden it just became a toy that he was just like playing with. And the straw that he was supposed to be drinking with was now a toy that he was playing with on the floor. So, okay, what was going on? So I realized at that point, he couldn't suck from a straw. And then I decided to further experiment and with this kiss to see if he could pucker his lips. And when I did that, I got a piece of cotton, sat it on the table, and I would lightly blow the cotton across the table. And I wanted him to mimic what I was doing. So what he would do was he tried, but instead of blowing out, he was blowing in. So when he was breathing in, and the cotton wouldn't go anywhere, and I was blowing out, and he couldn't blow out. So I'm like, okay. So we tried to practice on a piece of fruit. So we got like an apple, orange, washed it real good, of course, and I practiced the pucker against the piece of fruit, and he would so that's his kiss. So I'm like, okay, well, maybe won't learn to kiss. So then I got some bubbles. And he was so fascinated with his bubbles, and he just had to figure this thing out. So he was getting occupational therapy, and I told the occupational therapist that he really liked the bubbles, and that was the one thing that he was motivated to really pucker and blow. So eventually he got the whole bubble thing down, and he was able to give me a kiss. And I was like, yay! So of course we had a big party for that, and it was really exciting. It was an exciting time in history for me because I was like, oh my gosh, is he going to ever do this? But time, remember I said time and understanding patience and being persistent. So getting to him to those therapy appointments all the time, that's the persistence. Just doing it. Even when things look grim, keep going. Just keep going. So I was looking at diet, and there were a lot of things in his diet that I was questioning. So I knew that there were some studies that were done on gluten and casein and how, some kids with autism have like these bad side effects, like negative side effects from gluten and casein. So gluten is the protein in wheat, and casein is the protein in milk. So he never was able to really drink milk anyway. I mean, he was lactose intolerant. So anytime he would have milk, he would have diarrhea and start throwing up at the same time. It was like from both ends. So pretty much, I never really had a problem with the dairy part because we just didn't give it to him. But the gluten, around that time, he was, eating a lot of gluten products. He had cereals and things like that. But, I didn't think about really taking it out of his diet at that time. And then when I did think about taking it out, it was like at that time in life, there weren't a lot of gluten-free replacements. So I didn't take it out of his diet at that time because he had to eat. So a little bit later, when he turned almost 7, he was almost 7, not quite 7, but almost 7 years old, I decided to take the gluten completely out of his diet. I mean, you either take it out or you don't. There's no such thing as a partial gluten-free diet. You're either gluten-free or you're not. If you have no gluten all day long, and then, at night you have a piece of bread, then you broke the rule. That is not a gluten-free diet. So I took the gluten out of his diet. And when I took the gluten out of his diet, I mean, totally took it out. I would say a few days later, matter of fact, not even a few days later, maybe about a day or two later, it looked like there was like this unveiling, just that like a veil was lifted from his face. And he looked more alert. He was more engaged. He was like excited. He was running around the house. He didn't look confused. He looked focused, like he knew what he was doing. And I'm like, whoa, what just happened? So, but he still wasn't talking. So around that time, I noticed the most incredible thing, which was he actually started to say a few words. And this was like, what? Did you just say that? Now, granted, he was talking, but he was uttering like this unclear speech. But between every utterance of unclarity, there was like one real word, which was something we had never seen before. So it would be like the car, the house, hat, So he was saying words, but they weren't like together, but that was new. He was saying them. So as time went on, a little bit later on, I mean, not even weeks later, I'm talking about days later, he started saying 2 words. And then the uttering kind of became less. So I also noticed he was experiencing some echolalia. Now, echolalia is when the child repeats everything you say. So if I say, are you ready to eat? He'll say, are you ready to eat? But he wasn't saying the full sentence. He would say part of it, but he would blah, 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 in between the utterances. And it was like repeating what I was saying. And I'm like, why is he repeating what I'm saying? I mean, I just don't get this. But echolalia actually can be normal, because I was thinking that this is an abnormality for autism, and it can be. But at the same time, it can be normal, a normal form of progression to speech. So he was experiencing echolalia, and that was new, but it was actually a good thing because he was actually repeating what I was saying, which was way more than what he was doing before, which was nothing. So he would say like, a word, and he would repeat the word I say, and then if he understood the word, and then he would utter blah, 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 and then, and he'll end it with another word that I said. So he was actually experiencing echolalia. So I talked to a speech therapist about that, and she was like, oh, well, that's great, because, this can advance and he can, become maybe more verbal. And I was like, oh, wow. And the only thing I did different was take the gluten out of his diet. So about a week later, he was actually talking. I mean, saying words, not like full-fledged sentences, but he was putting words together. This was a miracle. This was a true miracle. And I mean, I just wanted to cry because I never thought that I would ever hear my child speak. And it was something as simple as taking the gluten out of his diet that a whole veil was unlifted. I mean, it just like lifted off of him, and he was like a whole new child. So I noticed he got his hands on some gluten, and that same glazy appearance came back. And I'm like, you know what? This is it. That gluten is the problem. That was the culprit of his speech. So for my son, that was a huge part of the speech puzzle that was missing. And taking the gluten out of his diet is the one thing that actually helped him to be able to talk. So I've always really just stayed away from the gluten. I really did not try to introduce it back again. Matter of fact, as he was growing up, I taught him to read the food labels. If it had gluten or casein, you don't eat it. And he understood. So when we would go to the store, it was so funny because he would say, Mommy, does this have gluten? This was when he was really starting to advance. He was like, Mommy, does this have gluten? And I'm like, well, you know, he was reading at that time. So I'm like, okay, yeah, well, read it. Check the ingredients. And I would give him that autonomy because I wanted him to do it on his own. I wasn't going to take over for him anymore. I mean, even though he was new to the language life, I wanted him to be able to be independent. And that's the goal, for your child to be independent in the end. So, you know, when he would ask me something like about gluten or about if he could have a certain food, he knew what to look for. So I would say, look, you need to read the ingredients and tell me if there's something that you can have. So he would look at it, and even if he didn't understand all the other words, he knew the word gluten and he knew the word casein. He knew that those were the two things that he wasn't supposed to have. And I taught him about wheat. I taught him about rye. I taught him about all the other things that had gluten in it. So he was able to look at the labels when we went to the grocery store and decipher whether it was a food that he could have or not. Here he is in action. Look at that. Amazing. Yeah, so don't give up on your child. Do not give up. I'm telling you, this is like a miracle for me because the thing is, he was finally able to say, Mommy, I love you. And finally able to give me a kiss. Not the plastered, splattered spit tongue that was like blah on my face, which I was happy to get, don't get me wrong. So he was able to give me a real kiss and able to say, Mommy, I love you. And that was what I longed for all my life. And I prayed and prayed and prayed for this day, and it had finally come. And I'm telling you, when I tell you I was overwhelmed and overjoyed and just tears of joy flowed, I mean, I'm telling you, I could have cried a river because this was, it's just, I can't really explain it. It's like when you don't see the light at the end of the tunnel and then all of a sudden the light just unveils itself. This was that moment. So yeah, so gluten out of his diet was the one thing that transformed my son's speech. And now to this day, he's able to hold a great conversation. We can talk. He tells me his needs. He tells me anything that's going wrong in his life. You know, these are the kind of things that are important. And if you can get your child to that point, you know, that's wonderful. Now, granted, not every child is going to be verbal. And the thing is, that still doesn't mean you give up. You don't say, oh, well, you know, he's doomed, you know, he's never going to talk. You don't know, because there could be a piece of the puzzle that's just missing. And for my son, it just so happened to be the gluten. Now, I will tell you one other thing. Allergies are important because I still tried to figure out why was this boy so irritable when he was a baby. So when he was about 6 or 7, I ended up getting allergy testing. And the reason I did that was because he seemed so sensitive to certain foods, and some foods seem to cause challenging behaviors. So we'll talk about that in another video because that's another whole topic. So he had allergy testing and he was sensitive to so many things. I mean, it wasn't considered to be a full-fledged allergy because the numbers weren't high enough, but just about everything on that allergy panel was elevated. And that means that there was some sensitivity to it. So the interesting thing was, He was off the chart allergic to cats and dogs. We had cats living in our house ever since he was a baby. When he came home from the hospital, we had 2 cats. And now that I'm thinking back on all of that and all the crying that he did, even though he didn't show allergy symptoms like runny eyes or itchiness or any of that, he was crying so much. And I'm wondering if the dander from the cats was causing him to have irritability. And that's a possibility, a very strong possibility, because his numbers were immeasurable. I always wonder now if it was the cats that caused all of that irritability in him and why he cried so much. I mean, because the crying was unreal. I mean, I would actually leave to go to work in the morning and my mom would watch my son for me. So when I would leave and check on him during lunchtime, I would call, he was crying in the background. Or if I checked on him at any point during the day, he was crying in the background. And when I would get home from work, he might just be asleep only because he cried all day long. But if he wasn't asleep, he was crying. And I mean, I just couldn't figure this whole cry thing out. So yeah, so that really made sense to me later. And then it also made sense to me later why he didn't breastfeed, because he couldn't suck a straw. So because he didn't know how to maneuver a straw, he wasn't able to drink the juice. So the likelihood is he wasn't able to latch on to the breast milk because he could not suck a straw. So how could he latch on to the breast? So all of that was like an oral motor functioning issue, occupational therapy and speech and all this other stuff. And it was something that I did not have the skills with, but I did learn some things online and I tried my best to do what I could as a parent at home. But at the same time, he did get professional services as well. So I just thought this was a really interesting story to tell you, because I know that a lot of you out there have children that are nonverbal. And, you know, a lot of times we don't think about the little things. You know, is there something in my house that my child has accessibility to that's actually the piece of the puzzle that's missing, that's tampering with their speech? So in my case, it was the gluten. I mean, it was all over the place, you know, and it wasn't until later in life when I took it out of his diet that that piece of the puzzle was solved. So I say all of that to just say this. The number one thing that you should do if you have a child that is nonverbal, or just in general, get a really good notebook or a journal, or even go online and print out one of the food diary forms and print them out, just print them out and do a good solid 30-day history of your child's eating. Now, don't change anything right now. Just do it the way you would normally do it for 30 days. And don't change a thing, because if you change something now, you won't know what made the difference. So keep everything exactly the same. Do a comprehensive 30-day diary. And in that diary, you want to document what the child ate, what the child drank, and afterwards, you want to also monitor up into the next meal any abnormal behaviors that you notice, like, you know, is there behavior? Is there maybe the child is trying to speak and not speaking, or anything that looks unusual? Just document. So this 30-day history is very crucial, because it's going to allow you to compare when you actually start to make changes. And when you do make changes, you want to make changes one at a time. You know, one at a time, and give it at least 1 to 2 weeks before you make the next change. So I wouldn't start off with removing all the gluten. I would probably start with, if your child is on dairy, removing that first. Now, don't go cold turkey. I mean, you might want to start with, like, you know, if you have like a 8-ounce cup of milk, instead of giving 8 ounces, give 6 ounces of milk and introduce the other 2 ounces with whatever other substitutes you plan to use. And just kind of gradually do that until you're eventually down to just the plain new product that you're using, okay? So gradually take an ounce or 2 every other day until you're finally at the product itself. Because sometimes when you just make drastic changes like that, children, they know the difference and they're like, oh, this is not the same thing, I don't want it. But if you don't make a huge change and it's very gradual and subtle, then you may have better results. Now, granted, some kids are very sensitive and they know the difference, regardless whether it's like even like 2 ounces of an ounce, and you make that change. They may notice, but the reality is most of the time, if it's a gradual change, you may get much better result. And when you start to remove the gluten from the diet, like I said, there's no such thing as a partial gluten-free diet. But if your child is used to gluten, you may want to do the same type of process as gradually reducing. So for example, if you're used to giving your child spaghetti and your child likes the spaghetti that you're giving, well, instead of giving them the full amount of spaghetti that has the wheat, then use like half and half. So you can use like the brown rice spaghetti and then use part regular spaghetti. Mix it together, and once you put the sauce on it, basically they won't even know the difference, or maybe they may not know the difference. But the bottom line is you want to do a gradual transition, but don't do everything at one time. Do them separate. So start with dairy, that's cheeses, yogurts, milk products, butter, anything that has dairy. Read your food labels is the next thing you must do, because if you don't read the food labels, there are lots of foods that are processed, and I don't really care too much for processed foods anyway. They're just not good for you because they have a lot of extra additives in them. But a lot of foods that are processed will be processed with wheat or with casein, and even though there's only traces of those things in it, you want to really look at that, because those are things that can cause that irritation and cause just the slightest trace could cause my son possibly to go back into that mode where he has that glazy appearance again. And I did not want that. So I was very careful about those ingredients, and I made him very aware of those ingredients as well. The other thing you want to look out for is dye. Red dyes. Now, I did a video on this wonderful cake that we made with Skittles, and it had red dye in it. So red dye is something that you don't want to do. Red, the yellow, I think it's yellow 5 and red 40 and all these different things. Those are things that you want to stay away from. So rarely would they have anything with red dye in it. Now, they have had things with red dye in, but also make sure that you look at your juices. Make sure you look at any sweet products that you give them, because that is not a good chemical. And when I did the cake video, I used dyes that were natural. So it was not like red dye 40 or yellow or anything like that. But the Skittles, if you look at the ingredients, you will see it has red, it has yellow, and I think there's another color, red, yellow, and I forgot the other color, but there's another color. And those dyes, if you Google red dyes and the yellow number 5 and all that other stuff, it will tell you that they're not good for you. They're not healthy, and they are carcinogens. And it's out there, you know, it's on the internet, it's everywhere you go. So it's not like anyone's tricking you, because it's there. But some of them are actually FDA approved. So it's like, why are these things FDA approved? So these things are carcinogens, meaning they can actually potentially cause cancer. And you want to be very careful, because autism is enough already. I mean, you probably have to take in a whole heck of a lot of it for us to get a cancer. So when you are reading your labels, make sure you're looking out for these red dyes, the yellow dyes, all these dyes, and Google them and read about it, because they're carcinogens. And they can actually, in the long term, possibly cause cancer. Now, the thing is, you probably have to consume a whole heck of a lot of it, but think about our life as adults, and when the internet wasn't available, and we were taking all of these things in, and the outgrowth of cancer in the United States. This is something to really think about, because, you know, these products are FDA approved. And if they're FDA approved, then you would think they're safe, but the reality is some of them aren't. So just be very conscientious with your food labels, looking for gluten, casein, dyes, anything like that. One other product I want to mention to you is anything that has malt, M-A-L-T, malt. And I noticed that when I would give my son anything that had maltodextrin in it, he had that same glazy-eyed appearance. He was foggy-brained. It was like behavior all over the place. It was crazy. It was so crazy. So I stay away from anything with maltodextrin in it. Now, as they get older, their systems may become more adapted to certain things, but there's no need to adapt their system to anything that is not good for them, especially something that's going to be a potential carcinogen. Now, autism is enough. So to look at carcinogens as well, that's a whole nother can of worms we're opening. So bottom line, guys, is today I just wanted to share with you how excited I was when my son actually started talking. And I'm telling you, this was just an amazing experience. So yes, definitely try the food elimination diet to see how that works for your child. It may take some time. You know, don't give up. That's the thing. Do not give up, because nothing happens overnight. I mean, it just doesn't. So persistence, time, understanding, patience, and persistence. And I do want to add energy, because it does take energy to do all of these different things. But trust me, in the end, guys, it's going to be so worth it. And even if the gluten or the casein does not help with the speech issue, still don't give up, because there's got to be an answer. Just keep searching for that answer, and you'll find it. So thank you guys for watching this video. If you enjoyed it and it was helpful to you, please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the post notification bell so you will know when I drop a brand new video on YouTube. Also, you can follow me on my social media platforms. You can find them in the description box down below. And make sure that you check out my other videos as well. So until next time, guys, peace.